shattered canvas. The morning light filtered through the half-packed cardboard boxes scattered across what was once Priya Sharma's dream home. 6 years of marriage, reduced to labeled containers and bubble-wrapped memories. She paused. Brush in, hand staring at the unfinished painting on her easel, the last piece she'd started before everything fell apart. "Are you sure about this?" her sister Divya asked, sealing another box with packing tape. "The gallery showing is in 3 months. You could postpone the move." Priya shook her head, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I can't stay here, Div. Everything reminds me of him." Her voice caught slightly on the last word. Ajay, the husband who had promised forever, then decided that forever meant until something better came along, specifically his 25-year-old marketing assistant. "You're too comfortable," he'd told her during their last conversation, his voice eerily calm as he dismantled their life together. "Your art is beautiful, but it's safe. I need someone who challenges me, who's hungry for more." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Priya. Her latest collection explored vulnerability and trust, concepts she now found painfully tangible. The cottage she'd found on the outskirts of Pune was nothing spectacular, a modest 2-bedroom with a small garden and a converted sunroom perfect for her studio. But it was hers, and it was far from the upscale neighborhood where she and Ajay had built their now shattered life. 3 weeks later, Priya stood in her new garden, soil beneath, her fingernails for the first time in years. The property beside hers was bordered by tall hedges, but she could glimpse an imposing modern structure beyond them, all glass and steel and intentional angles. She rarely saw movement there, though lights would illuminate different rooms. Each evening belongs to some tech guy, her only other neighbor. An elderly woman named Mrs. Bhatia had informed her over welcome chai. Hardly ever see him. Moved in about a year ago, renovated the whole place. Very polite when you do catch him, but keeps to himself. Vikram something or other. Priya appreciated neighbors who valued privacy. Her own fame in the art world, while modest, had meant that her divorce became fodder for whispered conversations at gallery openings. The small sanctuary she was creating here felt precious, precisely because it was unknown, unmarked by expectations or gossip. The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings in her garden, afternoons in her studio, evenings on her small porch with a glass of wine, watching fireflies appear as dusk settled. Her phone rarely rang except for Divya checking in or her gallery manager asking about her progress. The paintings that emerged from her brushes surprised her. No longer the careful explorations of human connection she'd been known for, but wild, fractured landscapes, brilliant with unexpected color combinations. Her gallery manager was ecstatic. "This is breakthrough work, Priya. Raw, honest. Pain transformed into beauty." Priya wasn't sure about beauty, but the honesty was undeniable. Each canvas felt like screaming into a void, therapeutic, necessary, and somehow both intensely personal and strangely disconnected from herself. One evening, as monsoon rains pounded against her roof, a power outage plunged her neighborhood into darkness. Priya lit candles, their glow reflecting on the wet windows. Through the sheets of rain, she noticed something unusual. Her reclusive neighbor's house was equally dark, but a single lantern moved from window to window like a solitary ship navigating a storm. She watched, oddly transfixed by this glimpse into another solitary life. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of curiosity about something outside her own pain. Who was this person who moved through darkness with such careful purpose? The next morning, assessing water damage from a leak in her studio roof, Priya didn't notice the tall figure standing at her garden gate until he spoke. "I believe this belongs to you." Serendipitous encounters, Priya spun around, a hand instinctively flying to her chest. The man at her gate stood perfectly still, holding her favorite scarf, the crimson silk one she thought had blown away during last night's storm. He was tall, with broad shoulders softened by a casual stance, his face partially shadowed by the hood of a simple gray sweatshirt despite the morning's warmth. "I found it caught in my garden hedge," he continued, his voice low and measured. The color stood out against all the green. As Priya approached, the man lowered his hood, revealing features that were striking in their understated way. Warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a strong jawline softened by a 5 o'clock shadow, and hair that curled slightly at the temples. Nothing like the polished tech moguls she'd met at AJ's corporate events. "Thank you," she said, accepting the scarf. "I'm Priya. I moved in about a month ago." "Vikram," he offered with the slightest nod. "Singanaya." He added his surname almost as an afterthought, as if unused to introducing himself. Up close, Priya noticed the faint smudges of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the kind that spoke of late nights and early mornings. "Would you like some tea?" "As a thank you," she found herself asking, surprising herself with the invitation. A brief hesitation crossed his face before he nodded. "That would be nice." Seated on her small porch, cups of masala chai steaming between them, Priya was struck by how comfortable the silence felt. Vikram seemed to occupy space differently than most people she knew. Present but undemanding, his attention focused on the garden before them rather than on filling the quiet with unnecessary words. "You're a painter," he finally said, noticing the smears of cobalt blue on her hands. "I am. Though lately, I'm not sure what I am," she admitted, the honesty slipping out unbidden. "Everything I create feels different now." Vikram nodded slowly. Evolution usually follows disruption. Something about his phrasing made Priya look at him more closely. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "My company started after my biggest failure. Sometimes, we need to break apart to reassemble into something stronger." "What company is that?" she asked, realizing she knew nothing about this man other than his name and his apparent comfort with philosophical observations. "Anavran Systems," he replied, watching her over the rim of his cup. Priya nearly choked on her tea. Even she, disconnected as she'd been from the tech world, knew of Anavran, the privacy-focused software company that had revolutionized data protection for ordinary users. "You're that Vikram Singhania?" He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the recognition. Among other things, the conversation shifted then, away from their respective work and toward safer topics. The best local, produce markets, the family of mongooses that occasionally visited their gardens, the unpredictable weather patterns of late. By the time Vikram rose to leave an hour later, Priya realized it was the longest conversation she'd had with anyone besides her sister in months. "Your roof is leaking," he observed, glancing at the buckets she'd placed in her studio. "I know someone who could fix that properly. If you'd like their contact." "That would be helpful, thank you," Priya said, walking him to the gate. She hesitated, then added, "I usually have morning coffee on the porch. If you're ever passing by." Vikram paused, his expression unreadable. "I'm an early riser," he finally said, which wasn't quite an acceptance or a refusal. 3 days later, as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Priya looked up from her sketchbook to find Vikram standing at her garden gate again. 2 paper cups in hand. "I was getting coffee anyway," he explained, extending 1 cup toward her. "I remembered you mentioned you like cardamom." Something warm and unexpected unfurled in Priya's chest. Not attraction exactly, but a recognition of the simple kindness in the gesture. For someone who valued his solitude enough to hide behind tall hedges, bringing coffee represented a significant gesture. Over the following weeks, these morning coffees became an unspoken ritual. Sometimes they barely spoke. Vikram absorbed in emails on his phone, Priya sketching the changing morning light. Other times, they shared observations about books they'd read or documentaries they'd watched. Priya learned that Vikram had created Anavrin after his own identity had been stolen, resulting in a 2-year legal nightmare. She told him about her upcoming gallery showing, her fears that her new work was too raw, too honest for the collectors who had followed her career. Art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed, Vikram said one morning, examining a photo of her latest piece on her tablet. This does both. It was the first time since her divorce that Priya felt truly seen, not as a woman recovering from betrayal, not as an artist having a breakdown or breakthrough, but simply as herself, evolving through pain into something new and as yet undefined. Then came the morning Vikram didn't appear at his usual time. Priya tried to ignore the disappointment settling in her stomach, focusing instead on the chai she'd made when the coffee didn't materialize. Just as she was about to return inside, she heard his voice calling from the street. "Priya, could you help me with something?" She found him standing beside a vintage motorcycle, its gleaming body a deep emerald green. "It won't start," he explained, looking both frustrated and slightly embarrassed. "And I have a meeting I can't miss." Without thinking, Priya grabbed her car keys. "I'll drive you." As they navigated morning traffic together, Priya realized with startling clarity that somewhere between broken pipes and borrowed coffee, Vikram had become a friend. The kind of friend who made her forget, if only, briefly about the hollow spaces Ajay had left behind. Shadows of the past, the gallery was crowded, buzzing with the particular energy of Pune's art scene. Wine glasses clinking, conversations flowing in English, Hindi, and Marathi, the occasional burst of laughter rising above the steady murmur. Priya moved through the space in a daze, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about her bold new direction. Her collection, titled Aftershocks, had already sold 3 pieces before the official opening. Her gallery manager, Nandini, was ecstatic, whispering about interest from international collectors whenever she passed by. "You should be celebrating," Nandini said, pressing another glass of champagne into Priya's hand. "This is everything we hoped for." Priya nodded, attempting a smile. The truth was, seeing her pain displayed on these walls, transformed into art, but still unmistakably hers, left her feeling strangely vulnerable. Each canvas documented her journey through grief and anger, a visual diary of her worst moments now being admired and appraised by strangers. "Is that one meant to represent rebirth?" a familiar voice asked from behind her. Priya turned to find Vikram standing before her largest piece, a fractured landscape where vibrant green shoots emerged from scorched earth. He looked different tonight, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his usually tousled hair neatly combed. Yet his expression remained the same, thoughtful, slightly guarded, entirely focused on her work rather than the social spectacle around them. "You came," she said, unable to hide her surprise. In their months of friendship, Vikram had never mentioned attending the opening, despite knowing how important it was to her. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied simply, his eyes still on the painting. "Though I admit I nearly turned around twice on the way here." Priya laughed softly, recognizing the admission of how difficult crowds were for him. "I'm glad you didn't." For the next hour, they moved through the gallery together, Vikram asking questions that revealed how closely he'd been listening during their morning conversations about her process. His presence beside her felt like an anchor in the swirling, social currents of the evening, until a voice cut through the pleasant haze of the night. "Well, pain certainly suits your artistic temperament, doesn't it?" Priya froze, the champagne turning sour in her mouth. She didn't need to turn to recognize Ajay's voice. Smooth, slightly condescending, the tone he used when delivering what he considered clever observations. When she finally faced him, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a willowy woman in a sleek, Red dress, Tanvi, the marketing assistant he'd left her for, now apparently his date to her gallery opening. Ajay, Priya acknowledged, hating how her voice sounded smaller suddenly. I didn't expect to see you here. He smiled, the familiar smile that once made her heart race and now made her stomach clench. I've always supported your work. That hasn't changed. The audacity of that statement, as if his support had remained constant while everything else fell apart, left Priya momentarily speechless. The collection is remarkable, Tanvi offered, her voice gentle in a way that somehow made things worse. So raw and honest. Before Priya could respond, she felt a warm presence at her side as Vikram stepped forward, his shoulder almost touching hers. The honesty is what makes it exceptional, he said, his tone pleasant but firm. Priya's ability to transform personal experience into universal truth is unparalleled. Ajay's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Vikram, undoubtedly recognizing him despite the lack of formal introduction. And you are? Vikram Singhania, he replied, extending his hand with practiced ease. A friend of Priya's. The subtle emphasis on friend wasn't lost on anyone, nor was the unmistakable power dynamic shift as Ajay registered exactly who was standing before him. Priya watched her ex-husband's expression change from casual condescension to careful recalibration. Of course, Anavrin Systems, AJ said, his tone shifting to the one he reserved for potential clients. Your work in privacy protection is revolutionary. Perhaps we could discuss potential synergies for my marketing firm. Vikram's smile remained polite, but cooled several degrees. I'm here to support Priya's remarkable achievement tonight. Business discussions would be inappropriate. With that gentle but firm dismissal, he turned back to Priya. I believe Nandini was looking for you earlier. Something about a collector from Singapore who's interested in commissioning a piece. Grateful for the escape route, Priya excused herself, feeling Ajay's eyes following her as she moved through the crowd. Later, after the successful but emotionally exhausting evening wound down, she found Vikram waiting by the exit, her coat draped over his arm. Thank you, she said as they stepped into the cool night air, for coming tonight. For what you said to AJ. Vikram shook his head slightly. I only stated the truth. They walked in silence toward the parking area, the weight of the evening settling between them. Finally, Priya spoke the question that had been lingering since Ajay's appearance. Does it ever stop hurting? Seeing them together? Vikram considered this carefully before answering. The pain changes shape, he said finally. It becomes less about them and more about what their choices revealed about your shared reality. Something about his phrasing made Priya study his profile in the streetlight. You speak from experience again. His smile was brief but genuine. Another time, perhaps. He opened her car door, then hesitated. Would you like to come to my house for tea? I have a feeling you might not want to be alone with your thoughts tonight. The invitation surprised her. In all their months of friendship, she had never once been inside his home. The tall hedges and sleek architecture had remained a boundary between them, one she had respected without question. I would like that, she said softly, realizing only as the words left her mouth how true they were. Painting new horizons. Monsoon season arrived with its characteristic drama. Dark clouds gathering suddenly, winds bending trees almost to breaking point before the skies opened with torrential downpours. Priya had always loved the rain, the way it transformed the world into something wilder, more elemental, washing away dust and revealing vibrant colors beneath. 6 months had passed since her gallery opening, since the night she and Vikram had shared truths over tea. Their friendship had deepened in that time. Morning coffees extending into weekend hikes, discussions about books evolving into deeper conversations about life, purpose, the future. Yet neither had acknowledged the subtle shift in energy between them, the lingering glances, the casual touches that felt anything but casual, the way they oriented toward each other in any shared space like plants seeking sunlight. On this particular stormy afternoon, Priya stood at her easel, working on a commission for a collector in Singapore, her first international sale. The piece was different from her Aftershocks collection, still bold in its use of color, but with a composition that spoke of balance rather than fracture, possibility rather than loss. She was so absorbed in her work that she barely registered the first urgent knocks at her door. When they persisted, she finally set down her brush, wiping paint-stained hands on her apron as she made her way through the cottage. Opening the door revealed Vikram, drenched from the downpour, a slightly frantic expression on his usually calm face. "The koi pond is overflowing," he explained without preamble. "The fish will be swept away if the water breaches the garden wall. I need help moving them." Without hesitation, Priya grabbed her rain jacket and followed him into the storm, across their adjoining gardens to his flooded pond. For the next hour, they worked in near silence, using nets and buckets to carefully relocate the colorful fish to large indoor tanks Vikram had hurriedly prepared in his sunroom. By the time they finished, they were both soaked through, shivering. Slightly in the air-conditioned house, Vikram disappeared briefly, returning with towels and dry clothes for Priya, a soft sweatshirt and drawstring pants that smelled faintly of cedar and something distinctly him. "Tea?" he offered, the familiar question a welcome return to normalcy after their emergency fish rescue. "Please," she replied, accepting the clothes and retreating to a bathroom to change. When she emerged, Vikram had changed as well, his hair still damp but no longer dripping. Something about seeing him like this, slightly rumpled, making tea in his kitchen while rain lashed against the windows, made Priya's heart constrict with a feeling she'd been carefully avoiding naming. "Thank you for helping," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "I know it seems ridiculous to worry about fish during a flood, but it's not ridiculous," she interrupted gently. "They matter to you. That's enough." His expression softened, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the sound of rain creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. "I've been thinking," Priya said finally, setting down her cup, "about what you said that night after the gallery, about how loving deeply is never wrong, even when it's painful." Vikram went very still. "Yes? I think I've been afraid," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as they left her mouth. "Not of being hurt again, though that's certainly part of it, but afraid of being wrong again, of trusting my own judgment." "That makes sense," he said quietly. "Trust isn't just about others. It's about ourselves." "Exactly." Priya took a deep breath. "But I've realized something in these past months. My judgment wasn't the problem with Ajay. My willingness to compromise myself was. I bent myself into shapes that weren't natural, trying to be what I thought he needed." Vikram's eyes never left her face as she spoke, his attention complete and unwavering. "With you," she continued, "I've never felt the need to be anything other than exactly who I am, even when I'm a mess, even when I'm still figuring things out." She smiled slightly. "Especially then." "I feel the same," Vikram said softly. "You've never once asked me to be more social, more public, more anything than I am. Do you know how rare that is?" Priya moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just want you to know that I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever this is between us, friendship, something more, I'm ready to explore it, without expectations or timelines." Vikram reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face, with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I've been waiting," he admitted, "not wanting to rush you, not sure if you were ready." "I am now," she whispered. His hand cradled her cheek, and she leaned into the touch, closing her eyes briefly at the simple pleasure of it. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. Instead of answering, Priya closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt both like a beginning and a homecoming. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she smiled against his mouth at the rightness of it all. Later, much later, they sat together on his covered veranda, watching lightning illuminate the sky as the storm continued its dramatic performance. Priya's head rested against Vikram's shoulder, his arm around her, their fingers interlaced. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Vikram considered the question. "Now we take each day as it comes. We keep having morning coffee. We see where this leads, without forcing it to be anything other than what it is." "Which is?" He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Something beautiful. Something honest. Something entirely our own." Outside, the rain began to ease, the violent downpour softening into a gentle patter. Through breaks in the clouds, the first stars appeared, bright points of light in the clearing sky. Priya thought of her paintings, how they had evolved from fractured landscapes of pain to more integrated images of balance and possibility. "I have a new collection forming in my mind," she said, tracing patterns on Vikram's palm. "I'm thinking of calling it integration." "Tell me about it," he said, his voice warm with genuine interest. As Priya described her vision, canvases, exploring how broken pieces can form new, stronger wholes when given the chance, she felt a profound sense of peace settle within her. The pain of Ajay's betrayal hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something else, something that had ultimately led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this version of herself that she was finally learning to trust. Whatever came next, she would face it with open eyes and an open heart, no longer broken, but beautifully reconstructed into something stronger than before. The end. Unspoken truths. Vikram's house was nothing like Priya had imagined. Despite its imposing exterior, the inside was surprisingly warm, walls lined with books, comfortable furniture in deep blues and grays, large windows that would fill the space, with light during daylight hours. It lacked the sterile minimalism she'd expected from a tech mogul's home. "This isn't what I pictured," she admitted, following him into a spacious kitchen where he began preparing tea with practiced movements. "What did you picture?" he asked, glancing at her over his shoulder. "More glass and chrome. Fewer books." "Definitely not that," she said, gesturing toward a beautiful old record player surrounded by vinyl albums organized in wooden crates. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Technology is my work, not my entire life." He handed her a steaming cup. "Though I admit there's an entire floor dedicated to a home lab that probably better fits your stereotype." They settled into a comfortable sitting area overlooking the garden, which Priya now saw was much more extensive than she'd realized. Carefully tended plants surrounding a small koi pond, soft lighting illuminating stone pathways. "You mentioned experience earlier," Priya said after they'd sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "With seeing an ex with someone new?" Vikram's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "Yes. You don't have to tell me," she added quickly. "I know how private you are." He studied the surface of his tea for a long moment before responding. "Privacy and secrecy aren't the same thing. Privacy is a choice about boundaries. Secrecy often comes from shame or fear." Setting down his cup, he leaned back, his gaze steady but distant. "Her name was Ananya. We were together for 8 years, engaged for the last 2. Priya remained silent, recognizing the rarity of this voluntary disclosure. "I was building Anavrin, working impossible hours. She was an international development consultant, traveling constantly. We made it work because we believed in each other's dreams." His voice carried no bitterness, only a kind of weathered acceptance. 3 weeks before our wedding, I found out she'd been having an affair with her project director for nearly a year. I'm sorry, Priya said softly. The betrayal was difficult, but what came after was worse. His expression darkened slightly. When Anavrin received its first major funding round, suddenly I wasn't just Vikram who'd been left by his fiancée. I was a tech visionary whose personal life became fodder for business gossip. Understanding dawned on Priya. That's why you're so reclusive. He nodded. Success amplifies everything, including pain and humiliation. I decided to control what I could by keeping my personal life entirely separate from my public persona. And, has it worked? Priya asked. The separation? Mostly. His eyes met hers. Until a painter moved in next door and started asking perceptive questions over morning coffee. The simple statement hung in the air between them, neither an accusation, nor quite a compliment, just a truth, plainly stated. I should apologize for intruding, Priya said, though she couldn't summon any real remorse. Don't. His response was immediate. The hedges were getting too tall anyway, metaphorically speaking. They talked late into the night about their past relationships, about the peculiar experience of having personal pain become public property, about the unexpected paths that had led them to their current lives. At some point, Vikram put on a vinyl record, the soft strains of classical sarod filling the space between their words. Can I ask you something personal? Priya ventured as the night grew later, her empty teacup long forgotten. After tonight, I think that boundary has been thoroughly crossed, he replied with a small smile. Do you regret it? Loving someone who hurt you? Vikram considered this carefully. No, he said finally. Regret implies I would choose differently. Knowing the outcome, I wouldn't. Even knowing how it ended. Why not? Because loving deeply is never wrong, even when it's painful. His eyes met hers, serious and sincere. The capacity to risk your heart is rare. I respect that I still have it, despite everything. Something shifted in Priya's chest at his words. A knot loosening, a door opening to a possibility she had kept firmly closed since her divorce. I should go, she said suddenly, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't quite name. It's late. Vikram nodded, walking her to the door without pressing for explanations. At the threshold, Priya turned to face him, finding words inadequate for the evening they'd shared. Thank you, she said finally, for the tea, for the truth, any time, he replied, the simple words somehow carrying the weight of a much larger promise. Walking the short distance back to her cottage, Priya felt something unfamiliar settling inside her. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be in this moment, in this place, with the unexpected friendship that had grown beside her like the careful garden behind Vikram's walls. For the first time since Ajay had walked out, she felt not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something new and undefined, waiting patiently to be discovered.